This is a working microphone. It's identical to the one you're about to see in my interview with filmmaker Vivian Kerr, the key difference being that this one actually works. After recording that conversation, I checked the audio and video, as I often do, and it turns out that I sounded the entire time like I was talking into the room, a very large and echoey room. So, through the magic of digital tinkering, I was able to bring the audio quality to within the usable, acceptable range. So I hope that doesn't deter you from discovering a great filmmaker in Vivian Kerr. We had a really great conversation. And fortunately, for the sake of the audio recording, she did a lot of the talking and she sounds great. So I hope you check out Scrap, her new film, which is on Apple TV Plus and several other streaming services. I hope you keep an eye out for her follow-up film, Seance, which comes out either later this year or early next year. We'll talk about that in the interview in just a bit. But yeah, she's definitely one to watch, and I'm very excited to share this conversation with you. Apologize to you, my dear viewers/listeners, and to Miss Kerr for the audio difficulties, but did what I could to clean it up. And so, without further ado, here you go. Vivian Kerr, welcome to Kicking the Seat. It is a tremendous honor to talk to you because you wrote, directed, and starred in one of the best films I've seen in years. And it's called Scrap, and it's now available on Apple TV Plus and a few other streaming places. And you know, I wrote a review of it. It's a glowing review. I think I gave it probably 5 out of 5 on the old tomato meter because it really knocked me out. And the ability to talk to you, it's truly a thrill. I want to talk to you about the making of the movie itself, the kind of the themes, everything that you put into it, all the heart, the love and care, and also the fact that it's an independently produced film from someone who's never made a feature-length film before. We'll get into all of that, but first of all, welcome, and how are you doing?
Thank you. I'm like, I didn't even pay you to say all those things. Can you be my publicist? Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm doing great. And honestly, like, thank you so much for taking the time to review the film. I think, one of the things I learned, because this is obviously my first feature, is just like, it is an uphill battle for indies to get, attention, to get reviews. I think, and it does matter, there's like, sometimes I look and I'm like, does Wicked really need another like 2000th review? I'm like, can people review like just a few more indies? And it's like, meanwhile, I have so many indie filmmaker friends now who they're like struggling just to like try to get like any eyeballs on their film. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, honestly. As a film critic, I get a lot of kind of solicitation emails like, hey, watch this film, from publicists promoting big Hollywood movies like Wicked to independent filmmakers. And what really settled it for me, saying that I need to check this out, is I read your director's statement, which is a very kind of personal story about your career in Hollywood, and you had kind of an aha moment during the pandemic, which really kind of pushed you out of your comfort zone to, as I mentioned in my review, Lloyd Kaufman might say, make your own damn movie. Strangely enough, I'm reading a book by Lloyd Kaufman right now called All I Need to Know About Filmmaking. I Learned from the Toxic Avenger. And he has a chapter in there where he was talking about working as the production manager and location scout for movies like Rocky and Saturday Night Fever back in the 70s. And he came to a point where he just realized, I can't do this for other people. I'm an artist. I have something to say, even if it's making movies like The Toxic Avenger, no offense. But he just realized, I got to strike out. I got to take my shot. And it very much, that idea resonates with your story. So if you could tell me about your story and how we kind of led into the creation of Scrap.
Sure. So originally I came to LA to be an actor. I came here to study undergrad theater at USC. I thought I was going to, I genuinely think I thought I was going to have a career like doing regional theater and doing like Ibsen and like, Hedda Gabler and Shakespeare. Like, I really thought like that was going to be my career. And, if I was lucky, I could do Broadway someday. And then graduated, and then you kind of find out like there's really not that much work in theater in the United States. This is not the UK, right, where you can join a repertory company and like actually make a living. It's almost impossible to make a living in theater. So very, very quickly, I realized I needed to figure out how to earn a living as an actor. And so I started I started trying to get on camera work. I started working in TV a little bit, doing like tiny little guest spots and in series, and then just writing projects, like so many other actors, like writing little projects for your friends, producing and directing little short films that we would shoot in like my terrible, like, the living room of my like terrible Koreatown apartment for like no money. It was, but like, I mean, really, really indie. And was doing that throughout my 20s. And then I think when I got into my 30s, I really wanted to make a feature. I think, hitting that period of my life where it's like acting was going okay, but it wasn't like I had like a breakout thing. Do you know what I mean? Like I hadn't been cast as like in a TV series that like where I was the lead and like it broke out and, so I didn't have to worry about money anymore. So like I was just sort of like cruising along, and I think I never felt particularly challenged. I think a lot of the roles I was auditioning for, like a lot of my female friends, we joke that it was a lot of being like raped and murdered on TV, right? Like, where like you audition for these procedurals, right? Where like your job is basically to, show up, cry, go home, which was fine. And I was like thrilled to book anything, but wasn't very exciting, wasn't really like the fullest expression of what I thought I could do. And I think I was also just sort of depressed and like kind of, just like not really sure what to do next. I mean, so much so that in 2000, God, right before the pandemic, 2019, I moved to New York and was like, I just need to like change of scenery and I need to maybe just switch things up a little bit, and moved to New York for about a year. And then when I was in New York, I was like, okay, if I'm really going to try to get Scrap made as a feature, I have to go back to LA. So bought a plane ticket in February of 2020 and left New York, came back to LA with the intention of, I'm going to figure out how to get this feature made no matter what. And then like 3 weeks later, there was a lockdown. So it just took a lot longer. But I think just like a lot of people, I sort of laugh at that like actor to writer to director pipeline. I think is just really common because I think there's a lot of actors who are unsatisfied with the roles that they're auditioning for and the work they're being offered.
As far as those kind of roles, I'm curious, being kind of typecast or getting that work of being like the victim, is it kind of easy, like you do a couple of them and then you can actually show up and do it by rote, or are there different demands, different challenges? Like how do you even prepare for something like that?
I mean, definitely there are different demands and challenges. I actually think it set me up great for being an actor director, because sometimes, I've gotten people ask me a lot, like, well, how did you direct yourself? Like, how are you playing the lead and directing it? Like they really, which is sort of bizarre. I don't really know why, because a lot of people do that now, but it seems like something that's really hard for people to wrap their brains around. But I actually think being that kind of jobbing actor for so many years set me up great, because you have like no time, and sometimes it is like, you're just like, you walk in a room, you sit down and they're like, okay, now cry. Like, I mean, they don't say that, but you understand what the expectation is. And so you have to become so self-sufficient. Like you have to do all of, your preparation at home, in your trailer. Like you have to kind of be ready to go at a moment's notice. You have to be incredibly flexible. You have to be able to go in and like read the vibe of a room, and like be normal and like laugh and joke with people, but then also kind of be able to snap into it whenever they're ready. You can't be in any way self-indulgent if you're like the guest star of a TV series. You have no control, you have no say. So, and you never get to watch your own performance, right? Like you don't go watch playback, like you don't have any control over what takes they're going to use. So you just like, you show up, you're ready, you do it, you move on. And like that, being able to work like that as an actor was great for Scrap, because an indie film, like you're moving so fast because you don't have the budget the bigger films do. So like we didn't have time for playback, not that I would have watched it if we did, but we didn't have time for that. We didn't have time to be precious. So it was a lot of like me just having to prepare in a way where I would just do kind of what I did on these TV shows, which is like know what I'm doing in this scene today, show up, do it, move on. And I think once you can do that, and I think that only comes with experience, but like I saw it with like my actor friends. Like once you're able to, it takes a few years to kind of work that out for yourself. But once you can do that, then you really can do anything because you're not reliant anymore on like a director to like pull a performance out of you. You're sort of like in control of your own instrument, I guess, to sound pretentious.
Well, because you made Scrap as a short, also with Anthony Rapp, and so tell me about how did that come together? I mean, he was in Rent. I grew up watching him in Adventures in Babysitting, one of my favorite films of all time. So how did you guys get connected, and how did you turn Scrap into a feature? And did you use kind of the same, crew that worked on the short to make that leap?
So we shot the short in 2018. So at that point, I wanted to make the feature. And I just had no idea how to do that. I'd only ever done shorts and web series. So it felt like making that leap almost felt like impossible to me, but I knew how to make a short. So I decided essentially the first like 15 minutes of the feature, I would shoot as a proof of concept. And even at that point, like I wasn't sure if I think I was a little bit listening to people who were sort of saying I should reconsider acting and directing at the same time. Like I think I was letting them get in my head a little bit. So I actually hired a director to come and direct the short. And so I didn't direct the short. And she was great. And then Anthony, we just made an offer through his reps and he liked the script. And I think also because he knew the short was a proof of concept for a feature. At that point, he hadn't read the feature, but I think he knew that there was like enough going on between these characters that it felt like it was going to actually hopefully become a feature. So yeah, so and that is rare, definitely. I think it is hard, I think, for people to get named talent in their shorts. But he came and we had a great time working together. And I think really as soon as we were doing the scenes in the short, I was like, oh, this is perfect. Like this dynamic, I fully believe he's my brother. Like this dynamic we've created is like, I love it. Like, I think it's really funny. And I think it's really like, I just think there's a lot of potential here and it felt real to me. So I then ended up kind of tailoring the feature script to him, which now if he hadn't done the feature, I'm like, I don't know. I mean, it would have been weird, I guess. But yeah, so the short we shot in 2018, 2019, we did a whole festival run with the short. And the short was really successful, did a lot of festivals, and there was great audience feedback. Like it seemed like the audiences wanted to know, like they were like, well, what happens? Like, is she getting out of that car? Like, is she gonna tell her brother what's going on with him? Like, and I was like, well, we gotta see the feature. So yeah, so it had a good reception on the festival circuit. And then the process of doing that, I was like, I just kind of came to the realization that I was like, you know what? No, like I have to direct the feature. It matters so much to me. And I really have to kind of protect it a little bit. Like I know I need to make sure that it's done right because I've put so much effort into this. Like if I just can't, like I sort of joke that I was like, if anyone was going to mess it up, it was going to be me, like I just couldn't, at that point I was just all in. So yeah. And so then we shot the feature in 2021. And then that premiered in 2022. And then we did 2 years of film festivals with it. And then it just now is released on VOD. So just like a 7-year journey, no big deal.
Well, I mean, it's incredible. First of all, when you decide you were going to do the feature and you got back in touch with Anthony, was he like, there's a pandemic going on? What are you talking about? Did you get the reaction from a lot of the people because everything was kind of shutting down and people were like, I don't know if we can even talk outside to one another without wearing a mask or standing 6 feet apart. What was that like, just deciding you were going to do it and then putting up the bat signal to gather people together? Was there resistance, or were people like, we've been locked up for a year, we got to do something?
At that point, I think we were lucky because the pandemic started sort of, I guess, March of 2020. And then I think really by that summer, I think the guilds had sort of put together a basic outline on like how certain projects could start to shoot again. So I think it was that summer. So really at that point, by the time we shot Scrap in 2021, it had been, I think, almost like a year of people working like, and yeah, like we had to wear masks. We had to have like PPE. We had to have COVID check. I think we did COVID testing 3 times a week. That was, that was the only thing that was stressful is I was like, we sort of had a short list. It was like people who can't get COVID. I can't get COVID. Anthony can't get COVID. We did have one cast member, a supporting cast member, who did get COVID, and we did have to rearrange the shoot schedule a little bit because the rule was if you tested positive, I think you had to be offset for 10 days, I think.
Sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah, and luckily it was early enough in our shoot that we were still going to be filming 10 days later. So we were like, okay, well, we'll just hope that they recover quickly and we'll just figure this out. But yeah, so at that point, by the time we did shoot it, it was 2021. So crews in LA at that point even though there was much less work, people had the experience of working that way. Which is also like, I can't say enough about like our crew and how dedicated they were. Like that's a horrible way to work. I mean, film shoots are like, sometimes your days are like 13, 14, 15 hours. And to have a mask on for like 15 hours, I mean, I don't know. I thought it was horrible. I had one of those like face shields, so at least my mouth was like uncovered. But yeah, they worked so hard, and yeah, so I'm just grateful that time is done.
Now, as far as you stepping up to the plate, like you said, you never like directed a feature before. You hadn't starred in a feature before. I assume you hadn't written anything to this scale, or maybe you had and you just haven't produced those yet, except for Seance, which we'll talk about soon. But where do you start? I mean, do you just, maybe it's the experience you've had working on other productions, maybe you have an idea of who to call first or what the initial decisions are to make. But did you have any mentors or any people you've worked with on past jobs who are like, oh, I know, here's a checklist I can send you, that kind of thing?
Yeah, definitely. Like the guy who did his name's Rob Fillmore. He was our production sound. I think he's done production sound for everything I've ever worked on. I mean, I think I met him over 10 years ago. I think we met off Craigslist. I think we met in a Starbucks, and I was like, oh, you can do sound for my short. Great. And I've just called him. I mean, he did production sound for Seance, he, he's so good at his job. And I think when you find someone like that, yeah, you just like latch on and try to hire them as much as you can. So there were definitely people where it was like, okay, who do I know that I've worked with before? And then everybody else was just asking referrals, like other filmmakers. And just, it's also hard for an indie because you're not able to pay people like a huge amount of money. So, if you're paying people like, I don't know, let's say $300 a day, it's like, there's a lot of people who just like won't work for that little money. So you're sort of like begging people to work on your little project and not abandon you to go shoot like a commercial that's going to pay them like 4 times as much, like you're like, please, please. So yeah, it was, it's, I think finding those collaborators is always like a challenge. But I mean, I got super lucky. Like my editor, Toby Yates, who unfortunately passed away at the end of last year, but he was, I mean, such an incredible mentor for me. Like I think he's edited like 40 features, something like that. His father, Peter Yates, was a very well-known director. He directed Bullet. And so like Toby grew up editing on film. Like he had this vast experience. And I got to be on the receiving end of it because frankly, he'd been out of work during the pandemic. You know what I mean? So like I got to work with some people that I think I would normally never have considered a project like Scrap. It would have been too small for them. So to have like an editor like that and be able to sit next to him for weeks and weeks and like see how he works, have creative discussions with him about the edit, just hearing stories about, I don't know, actors that I can't name names from earlier in his career, and to take a scene that isn't working and like, really learn from him how to make it work. I would say I almost learned more about directing from being in the edit with him than I did on set.
Yeah, they say that the film, you write it and then you direct it and then it's kind of redone or it's finalized, finally shaped in the edit. You can rarely plan for everything when you're writing the script, even though you're like, oh, this is gonna be the movie I make, and it's completely different in some cases. So were there, I guess, any of those did anything happen in the editing room? And maybe it's too late by then because you're an indie and you can't go back and like do extensive reshoots.
Yeah, there's
But were
that.
there any, yeah, were there any changes where that you were kind of surprised you had to like make some harsh cuts or some awful decisions, or maybe even you found some inspiration in the edit that you hadn't considered when you were first thinking about the film?
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny because I think there are things that you can be stubborn about. Like, for example, the end of Scrap is sort of this like one shot, right? Where we kind of like push in on Anthony. And that was always going to be like, I was like, that's the end of the movie. Like, that's the shot that the movie is going to end on. And a little bit people would sort of be like, well, maybe you should shoot a little more coverage. Like you should maybe shoot something, a little bit here and there. I was like, no, that's good. That's the ending. That's going to be the ending of the movie. So like sometimes that stubbornness is good because you're like, well, we didn't shoot anything else, so I can't be talked out of this. Um, but also I think sometimes it's bad. Like in the short, there was a moment where my character, after my character is sort of chased off from like sleeping in front of some guy's house, I pull over and a woman pulls up next to me in traffic. And I look over and she's just sobbing, like uncontrollably crying. And we can't hear her. Like you see Beth sort of notice her just like having a meltdown. And then the light changes and the car moves forward. And it's just a very tiny moment in the short. The audiences loved it. Like they always would like comment on it. They thought it was really moving. It was, based on stuff that like, I mean, that happens in LA like all the time. You're just like driving along and you're like, oh, the person's having a meltdown. Cool. Well, good luck, and like you just keep going. And I just loved it. And I really wanted to try to recreate it in the feature. And it just didn't work. I mean, we shot it, we actually with a different actress, but we shot it and it just didn't work. Like in the context of the feature, like it wasn't necessary. It felt like what made it special in the short was that it felt sort of, I don't know, profound. And then in the context of the feature, it just kind of felt stupid. And, but I was so insistent. I was like, no, it has to be in it because it had such a strong reaction in the short. And then Toby, he was kind of like, well, like maybe it's different. Maybe we consider taking it out. And I think the day we locked the cut, I finally was like, all right, take it out, like take it. But I needed to, bring it all the way to its sort of, I don't know, I needed to push it as far as it could go before I could finally see that it wasn't working. So, and again, like that's what a great editor does. Like a great editor doesn't fight you, but they advise you, they coach you, they assist you. And then, when you decide something that they told you weeks ago, they don't say, I told you so.
We haven't really talked about what the movie is. I feel like I'm doing a disservice to the audience.
Yeah. I can do
a review.
Yeah.
No. All right. Well, the movie is about your character, Beth, and she's a single mom, and she's got a little daughter named Birdy, and Birdy is staying with Beth's brother, Ben. Pardon the alliteration. Because Beth has lost her job, her kind of high-powered kind of PR job, and she's living in her SUV, and Birdy's staying with Ben because she wants to kind of protect her from the realities of homelessness. And it's just a temporary situation because Beth figures, well, I'm in LA, I can get back on my feet with another PR job, but it turns out to be a weeks and weeks long kind of struggle. And Ben and his wife Stacy, played by Lana Parilla. Is that how I pronounce her name, Parilla or Parilla?
Parilla, yeah.
Okay, I've always seen her name, but I don't think I've ever heard it spoken. So thank you for confirming that. But they're a couple, and Ben is a fantasy author of some note. He's had a successful first book, but he's kind of struggling with the follow-up, and he really wants to write this other book that's not in the genre, and his publisher's giving him crap for it. And Stacy and he are trying to have a baby, and that's got all sorts of problems, and she's kind of the high-priced attorney who's bringing all the money. So there's all these crazy little family dynamics that are going on in and around Beth's world, and she's trying to navigate it while also being in complete denial about all of her problems. And that's kind of her journey in the film, is trying to figure out when she's going to face reality, if she's going to face reality and move forward, and how long are the people that she loves and that love her going to put up with her being stuck. It's a beautiful story, and what I wanted to ask you is how, not where did you get the idea, because I hate that question, but maybe this is a more annoying question. How did you write it? Because the wisdom, the life experience, the honesty I feel that comes across, through the screen and right into my heart, it feels like this was written by someone who's kind of on their deathbed, has a lifetime of several people's experiences, and has that kind of insight. I mean, tell me about the writing process of this. Did you write it by yourself and kind of like send it out to friends to say, does this feel authentic, or did you get ideas from perhaps the actors you were working with? Did you kind of collaborate? Tell me about the writing.
Well, thank you very much. That's very nice. Wow. I mean, wow. Gosh, how did I write it? Well, I think I had an advantage because we did the short, and because I was doing festivals, like traveling to festivals throughout 2019 with the short, I was constantly thinking about the film. And then I was constantly showing the short to audiences, doing the Q&As, hearing from audiences, like people talking to me in the lobby about like what in the short what they resonated with, and then like what questions they asked me. People would ask like, wait, how come they're okay with like Birdy staying with them? I'm like, yeah, it's a great question. Like, why are they okay with that? And so it was like for myself as well, like wanting to sort of unpack these questions and kind of delve into that a little bit. And so I would say honestly, like for this film, I think it was one of those annoying things where like it was really easy to write. Like it kind of lived in my head for years. And then when it finally, I think I remember when I finally like one night, I think I was just procrastinating, was like, it's done. Like, you've written the whole thing in your head. Like, why aren't you writing it? And I think, after a couple glasses of wine, I think I like took out a white piece of paper and just like, actually was like, okay, write down everything that's going to happen in the film. Like, you already know it. So like, you're lying to yourself, like write down what's going to happen. And so like, I wrote out on like one, which I do still have, which I keep meaning to like, it's a little embarrassing, but I think it's, I should post it on Instagram or something. I like can't figure out where it is, but I know I still have it, this piece of paper. But like I wrote down like, okay, act one, this, she wakes up in her car. She's going to do this. This is going to happen. So I just wrote down all the plot points, act two, act three. And God, I really wish I could find it now and show it to you. But, I wrote that down almost to prove to myself, see, like, it, like you do know it. And nothing really changed. I mean, now, like if I look at that piece of paper now, it's going to have all of there might be some small things, but it's going to have every beat of the movie in it. And then I think actually writing the script maybe took like 2 weeks after that. Like I just, so it was like very, very easy, but it's because I had just lived with it and lived with it and lived with it in my head for so long. And I'd never done that before or since. And in general, I think as a writer, I have written a lot of other things that have not been produced. I've also written a lot of like TV pilots. And I think I'm a really big believer in like not showing your writing to other people until you're like 99% happy with it. Because I think things can get very, I don't know. I just like don't really believe in that kind of like, I don't know, like brain trust kind of. I mean, I do, but like only at like like the last stage, I think you have to kind of go as far as you can go with something. And so it feels really, really personal and authentic to you, and then let people tear it apart, but if you let people tear it apart when it's sort of like nascent, it's a risk. It's too risky. Because then you might actually like shrink a little bit in what you're trying to say. So I think the film, like, I don't think if I'd showed it earlier to people, I think they would have told me to like soften Beth's character, or, give her a save the cat moment in the beginning. Like, let's make her nice. Let's make her relatable. Let's make her like, I think they would have tried to soften the edges. And I was like, no, it's better if we don't soften them. It's like, first of all, not everyone is a likable person. Like, I'm not sure I want to hang out with Beth, and I played her. But like someone who's a difficult person doesn't necessarily like, God, what am I trying to say? We shouldn't reserve our empathy only for likable people, like I'm sure there's people who are we were talking about the fires before we started recording, and, I'm sure there's like horrible, horrible human beings who've just lost their house, but like, it doesn't make it any sadder that they lost, it's, or like less sad. They still lost their house, like, no one deserves that, even if you're a monster. So yeah, and I think also I'm just like a fan of like Mike Leigh's work, and I like prickly characters. I like it when the characters are like almost like fighting the screenwriter a little bit, like the screenwriter is trying to make them nice, but the character's like, no, I'm going to be me. Like I feel like Mike Leigh's work does that. Anyway, I don't know if that answered your question, but yeah, I think it was just a very interesting writing experience, and different from I think anything else I've ever written.
Well, I talked about this, I think, in my review, but Beth is a very difficult character, but she's likable in the sense that she seems kind of fun, but you realize from watching her that she's all about the fun and masking the realities that she needs to face. But having said all that, she is committed to keeping Birdy protected and safe and not letting her know that everything is kind of crumbling down around them. That's why she's going to stay in the nice, the nice kind of fancy house and not living in the van. There is or the truck. There is a moment where Beth does take Birdy and they're like, okay, we're out of here. But then there's sort of a moment she realizes this is a pride moment. I'm going to go back and again do the best thing for my daughter and put her back in that safe position, even though I might have to eat some humble pie. That I think comes across throughout the film. So even when you're watching Beth make these kind of horrible decisions, you realize that underpinning all that is her trying to make some sense of her situation, trying to make things a little bit better for herself, even though she goes about it the wrong way, because she has a big why, and that why is Birdy. So she's not kind of obnoxious character. Like my kind of go-to is the movie Bridesmaids, which I think is just kind of like the unflattering bro comedy, but for women.
Right,
and
right.
Like, I really don't like any of the people in any of the characters in that movie.
Right.
But Beth is not that. She's an actual person.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think I'm glad that you sort of tracked that. I mean, those were like moments that I thought were really important to me. I mean, there was a moment where, like even when her ex shows up at the house, and she's like walking up with Birdy, it's like the first thing she does is like make sure Birdy's inside the house and close the door before she goes and talks to him, and it's like when they are meeting at the coffee shop and he's like, I just want to come by some night. And she's like, no, I don't think so. You don't really realize until later, like exactly what's going on. But, yeah, this is like also a woman who's like fleeing like a physically abusive relationship. And so, I would hope people would have a slightly more sympathy for her. The best compliment is when people say, I didn't like her at the beginning of the movie, but then I understood her at the end. I'm like, okay. Because, I'm sorry, but like someone who's like regularly being bashed about by their partner isn't really thinking clearly, Like, and so it probably took a lot for her even to, not go back to this person who does have means and would support them. But those means come with, the possibility of like being hit, the possibility of your child being hit. And I think there's a lot of women who would choose to live in their car rather than go back to that situation. So, yeah, and then we get into like all the stuff with Ben and like their kind of shared childhood trauma over losing their parents. Like she doesn't have any role, like there was no mother figure in her life to model after. Like, so, it's sort of like, you also understand it's like she doesn't know how to be a mother. Like there's no mother. She never had a mother. She remembers her mother, but like she was like, I don't know if we explicitly say in the film, but we sort of decided that they were about like, 7 and 17 when they lost their parents. So it's like she, doesn't really, you really miss out, I think, as a girl, like if you're not able to have a mother, especially as you're like kind of going through puberty, like that's kind of the time where you need your mother the most, where she's like, oh, hey, this is how being a woman works. Like, like if you don't have that kind of female guidance, yeah. And your only guidance is like your older brother. It's like weird, it's a weird, uncomfortable situation. So in a lot of ways, I think she is, like most of us, has just done the best she can with the circumstances she's been given. Although she could have knocked off the shopping a little bit,
But that feels so honest too, because she's filling out job applications online, and there's always that tab that has links to Amazon. Yeah, but no, even the thing with her ex Josh. I mean, there is sort of ambiguous, and I guess you've kind of filled in a question I had, was their relationship necessarily abusive to that degree? Because the vibe I got was he kind of snaps, and I don't want to spoil anything more than perhaps we already have, but
Oh, yeah.
there's a moment. No, well, there's a, you're not going to, I'm not going to spoil anything, but you watch the movie and you're going to be, I think, surprised and impressed by everything else that's going on. So, not you, but the audience. But I would say that there's something that happens and it's really dramatic and shocking. And I wondered if that was something that was kind of out of character for him, because he kind of seemed surprised by it. And that reaction makes me wonder if, now that we're talking, he was that guy, but perhaps he thought he had changed because of these kind of advancements in his career, and maybe he had low self-esteem because he wasn't the provider that he wanted to be, yada, yada, yada. But the audience is invited to bring their own kind of own interpretation, their own experiences into that dynamic. But regardless, it's good to see that it's heartbreaking, because Beth, I think, saw Josh as a rung up the ladder to try and make something better for both of themselves and for Birdy. And when it turned out that was the absolute wrong decision, she kind of fell back 2 rungs. That's what it felt like to me, anyway.
Yeah, he says, when they have coffee, I'm in therapy now. I'm working a program, and so I think, like a lot of people who are abusers, if they have been, if they've been sort of like heavy, alcohol users or drug users, like they might sort of say, like, well, I only am like this because of this addiction, or like, this is the monster that comes out when I'm under the influence of this. And so we didn't really sort of get into like super specific discussions about this, but I sort of thought like maybe that was the first time that he hit her sober. So like, women make a lot of excuses sometimes where it's like, he only hits me when he's drinking, right? Like and so I think having that relationship that was very like alcohol fueled, and they were very like kind of young and sort of reckless. And I think possibly, she was just making a lot of excuses for his behavior. And so it is a shocking moment because he's not drinking in that moment in particular, although they were hanging out earlier and having a little bit of party. But, in that moment, he is stone cold sober. And so I think his surprise as well is it's like, this is probably the first time he's done that like completely sober. So he's shocked by it, especially because in his mind, he was telling himself this story as like, oh, that was the old me. I am now accountable. I am now in therapy. I am now working on myself. I'm now, but it's like, no, you're not, like you haven't gotten deep enough yet, So yeah. And I think she sort of says to Ben later, he always had a bit of a temper, which I think is her probably incredibly downplaying their relationship, which again, I think is a lot. She is someone who has a lot of internalized shame. And yeah, especially if you have a brother who maybe has felt that you feel like you've been the black sheep, the last thing you want to do is go back to that person and say, well, you're right. I've screwed up again. It's like, you just, at some point you're like, you can't do it anymore. You feel like you can't go to them for help.
Well, and it also speaks to, the theme of Beth's kind of self-delusion, but also Josh's. Everybody in this film is dealing with some kind of an ideal that they are struggling to achieve, and also a veil that they're struggling to lift, right? Because they've got their own shortcomings that they have to conquer before they can move on. I think with the Stacy character, she is very antagonistic towards Beth in a lot of regards, partially because I think she sees herself as being like, I struggled to become an attorney. I've got a great job and a great husband. What are you doing? Why is your daughter on our couch? You're a loser. But she doesn't quite come out and say that. She says a lot of that through Ben, except, as the film progresses and her line gets, the thread gets very, very thin, she starts making like kind of more catty comments. But she's also dealing with her own struggle of motherhood. Like, you have everything that I want, and this is how you're treating that wonderful kind of cosmic gift. But I love that each of the characters finds a way to find peace with themselves and also with the other characters that they're kind of struggling with, except for Josh the ex. He's he exits stage left, and everybody's happy. But it is just there's that beautiful moment at the roller skating rink towards the end between Beth and Stacy, where they kind of have this kind of moment where it's like, yeah, they're not going to be best of friends, but things are going to be kind of okay. And I think that is the non-Hollywood indie spirit of trying to capture some bit of verite in this contrived whole situation of it being a fictional film that I really responded to. And there are those moments all throughout Scrap.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I love that scene with Lana and I in the roller skating. I mean, obviously I wrote it, but I but I like the scene a lot because I think it's the first time where like they're both really honest with each other. So I love like how Lana's character just says, yeah, I when I first met you, I didn't like you. Like it's just like, and yeah, they're not going to be best of friends, but there is this I think there is sort of this like there are things that needed to be said, like when she says to Beth, it doesn't you're my family too. It's just like it's sort of like I don't know. I mean, I think all families are like this. Like there's someone who you're like, I wouldn't choose this person to like be related to. Like I wouldn't necessarily have picked them, but they are my family. They're not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. We know we're going to be in each other's lives, even if we only see each other Thanksgiving, right? Like, so you have to kind of find a way to relate to this person and interact with them in a way that, yeah, is like kind of healthy and, hopefully hopefully like moves things forward a little bit in the relationship. But yeah, I mean nothing is sort of resolved. It's not like Stacy says, I guess we are getting to spoilers, but it's not like she's like, you have to go tell Ben, you better go tell him the dirty details of everything you've been doing. She doesn't push her like that. I think it really also shows like Stacy does have a huge amount of empathy and for her to like really let Beth get away with all of that and be like, okay, like, if you want to kind of play this game, if you want to like go off and live in your car and like, we'll just like lie to Ben about it for a little bit longer. Like, okay, but like, if you need anything, like I am here for you. But yeah, and I think Lana's performance is so good in that. 'Cause she conveys so much like strength and toughness as an actress. But then she can be so warm and vulnerable. So it was just great to see her it was just great to like stand in the scene with her and like kind of like watch her performance. Like it was I think she's amazing. She's such a underrated actress.
Yeah, I mean, across the board, you got some terrific performances in the film, and also it's kind of an awkward transition. Great locations. I mean, we mentioned the roller rink, but also there's Ben and Stacy's house. Like, I know this is an independent film, but from the way it's shot to the way it's lit to all the great locations, it feels much bigger than I guess it is. It feels much more expensive, I'm assuming. How did you find all these locations? Were you calling in favors? Was this another thing where you had to like crowdfund in order to rent out a place for a day? Tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean, that was the hardest thing, I think, in terms of like navigating the production because we shot it in 20 days. And that, we definitely could have used, well, we shot a little bit before and then we shot a little tiny bit after a couple like pickup shots. So I guess like technically 22 days, but really 20 days with our full crew. And it's like a solid like hour 45-minute film and has a lot of locations, so that was super ambitious. I think what we started was deciding like, okay, what are our like hero locations that I'm not willing to let go of. And obviously the roller skating rink, like that was like non-negotiable for me. Like I was not going to rewrite it and suddenly have it take place in like a bowling alley or like a park. I was like, it has to be the skating rink. And there really is only one in LA. Like the Moonlight Rollerway where we filmed is iconic. It's been there, I think, since the 60s or 70s. It's still got like those original lights. Like it's got a wood floor. I mean, it's such a just a I mean, it's an iconic LA place, and I think anyone who lives in LA like knows exactly where that place is. It's so steeped in nostalgia. Like generations of Angelinos had their kids' birthday parties there. So like when Beth's like, "Oh, my birthday party! Do you remember my birthday?" Like everyone on screen is like, "Yo, I remember my birthday party there." So it just feels like so many people can relate to it. And it's just such a great place, like to kind of bring Beth back into sort of her childhood and kind of her maybe delusion a little bit. So anyway, so that place, yeah, I was like never going to give that up. So that was like our most expensive location. So it meant that I had to compromise on some other things. So not that anything was cut, but like just for example, like the grocery store where Beth goes to was like maybe not the nicest grocery store, no shade to that location, but it was like a much more of like a bodega kind of a place, right? Because
Yeah.
we weren't going to be able to then afford like Whole Foods, so it was sort of like just compromising a little bit here and there. And then also I wanted to get as much of the city, that felt authentic to me on screen. So um, like the place where she, trying to think how to not do spoilers, where she's like almost going to get a bus. There's like a bus stop that she goes to that's right out front of Paramount Studios. And it doesn't, I don't think you can see the gate, but you can see the 5555, which is Paramount's studios address. And
Oh,
if you've ever been on Melrose and driven by Paramount or like taken a picture of the gate, like basically it's one of those things where it's like, if and it's like, kind of fun to me to be like, yeah, it's like, that's what it's like. It's like, she's dealing with the juxtaposition of like the glitz and the glamour. And then this sort of woman who's, homeless and yelling at her. Like, it's just, that's the real LA, like the juxtaposition. And so, yeah, I was figuring out like, what are those spots, Griffith Observatory, just trying to put as much of like the LA that I know that feels real to me on screen. I was also joking that this was like the anti La La Land. That I was like, um, that I mean, I love movie musicals, and I enjoyed a lot of things about that movie. But I remember when I saw it, I was like, I don't recognize the city like at all, and I live here. Like, and obviously, I get it. It's supposed to be like kind of a MGM movie musical version of the city, but I was like, I actually just really don't recognize this at all. Like, uh, so yeah, so I think Scrap, and I'm sure there are people who are going to watch Scrap and be like, I don't recognize this, but it's my LA, it's my version of LA. And then yeah, and then also some places just calling, like the Roost Bar, the bar where Beth goes to day drink. It's a real dive bar in LA called the Roost, which again, it's like if you know, and it's just such a funny place because if you look in the background of the shot, there's a bunch of like weird like chickens and roosters there, and like that is all their bar decor. Um, and that's just such a like funny random place. But that place, like, I mean, I just called them and was like, is there any way we could get in there for like 4 hours? And they were like willing to let us do it as long as we just credited them in the film. So definitely it was calling places and pulling strings and yeah, just figuring out like how to piece it all together. And I think that's the challenge of an indie film. You don't have unlimited budget. You can't call any place you want and just say, hey, can we film there? And they'll be like, great, pay us $30,000. It's like, well, no. So like, you're trying to, yeah, it was, I think that was the biggest challenge of this in terms of the producing side of it. But also I enjoyed it. Like it was, it's a fun challenge to be like, this is the money. How do we allocate that? And how do we do it in a way where it, hopefully looks expensive on screen? And for me, the locations and the cinematography were like the non-negotiables. Like I wanted, if that meant that sometimes we had to wear clothing from thrift stores, like fine, but it was like for me, yeah, those two things were always going to be really important.
I I can't believe you shot that in 20 days. And I mean, you know the number of locations better than I do, but I'm thinking, were there 10 locations or more? Because
Oh, there's like 2 dozen, yeah.
yeah, because you go as you're describing it, I'm replaying the film in my head. I'm like, oh yeah, there's the bar, the bus stop, the bodega, the house, the hotel. I mean, again, this feels like you had all the money in the world to put this together and shoot wherever you wanted, but to find that you're doing this, you got 20 days, you got your budget, you're calling in, favors or just finding places you can get for dirt cheap. Yeah, I'm trying to imagine. You were saying you were working like 13+ hour days. I don't know how you weren't working 24-hour days
Yeah.
for 20 days. That's crazy.
Yeah, and we tried to be really smart about it. Like, so we tried to sort of like not block shoot, but kind of shoot things really close to each other. So like there were, the one of the scenes where like I'm in the car, we shot that like a few blocks away from where the yoga studio where I go and shower. So it was like we shot those things back to back. So like certain things were close enough that like our company moves, we're not going to take that long. So it's like, okay, we'll shoot this scene on this block because there's another location, like the coffee shop is 1 block down. So it's like we're literally just moving a little bit down the street so that we can shoot 3 locations a day. Because if we were spread out, even though we shot all over LA, like we were like kind of trying to be in certain sections each day. And then it was great because the days that we were just shooting at Ben's house location, it was like, oh my God, we're just here. Like it was great, you know? And that was something that was interesting as well about the film because, you know, even as like playing Beth, it was like, it was a relief to like be in a nice air conditioned house, you know, after shooting days where we're cramped in this car on the street in the hot sun. I was, you know, even kind of going through that was like, yeah, it's a relief to just be indoors. Like even the crew, it was like, you could tell it was like, oh yeah, this is so nice. Like, oh, there's couches. Like, you know, it's so comfortable. It's hard to shoot, you know, on the streets of LA.
I would imagine. And, you know, just I feel like the relief that you're kind of mentioning that, you know, going to that nice location, you can see that on Beth's face whenever she kind of goes over to visit Ben, even though she's kind of begrudgingly there or you know, staying for a while. It is better than the van. I got to ask the opening shot of the film, which, you know, it's in the trailer and I hesitate to describe it because I feel it's such a great reveal. You know, a close up of you in your night mask, and you feel like, you think, oh, you're waking up in a nice bed, and it turns out you're in a van. Was that always the opening shot? Was that one of the key initial images? Because it feels like that was the inciting incident creatively. Like, boom, where do we go from here?
Yeah, definitely. And that was not the opening of the short. And it was one of the things that I was like, I really want to make sure that this is how we open um, the feature. And it's funny because that's sort of it's a cliche, right, in screenwriting where they're like, you should never open your film with the characters like alarm going off and them waking up in bed. Like it's sort of like they always say like never start your movie that way. But I thought it was, yeah, like I thought it was an interesting thing because I'm like, well, we do see so many movies that start this way, and it always starts where like they're in their bed and we see their apartment and then we watch them at their morning routine, and like that's how we learn about the character for the first time. And so it was a little bit of like trying to turn that idea on its head, where it's like, yeah, we're still hitting those beats. She's just in her car. And there's like humor in it too. It's like, you know, once you see that this is a woman who like has like a caboodle, you know, like her, like where all her stuff is, like makeup and hair stuff. It's like, wait, what? Like, why would you have that? Like even the eye mask, you're like, huh? Like it doesn't quite make sense, right? Like, why is she wearing pink silk pajamas? So like I thought that by having someone sort of in this context, but like almost the way that she's dressed and operating is like she's not in her car would kind of give the audience a lot of really quick information about her. Yeah, but yeah, that shot was very difficult to get. So I'm like very happy that we we made it work.
Well, you made the entire film work, and I can't recommend it highly enough to people to check out. Before we go, I want to ask about your follow-up film, Seance, a movie that could not be any further away from scrap if you tried, unless it was like a Marvel movie or something. But it is a late 1800s supernatural character study.
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
So that I wrote, so Seance, you are correct. Yeah, it's a chamber piece. It's a psychological thriller, very much in the vein of like The Haunting, the original The Haunting, Robert Wise's film, or The Innocents. It's 4 characters trapped in a house overnight during a storm, and there may or may not be a ghost. And yeah, I think that film I actually wrote in 2020 during lockdown. And part of the reason why I wrote it was because I was having a really hard time figuring out how to get money for Scrap. And because Scrap had so many locations, it just kept inflating the budget. And I remember thinking like, well, you know, I wonder if I could write something that would just be like really, really simple, like really contained. Of course, it didn't end up being that way shooting it, but but in my head I was like, oh, this will be like a very like simple kind of actor piece, like low budget, just 4 people in a house. And I think it was kind of a little bit of a throwback to my theater roots. You know, I wanted to do something that felt more like a play, that maybe had a little bit of that that energy. And also because scrap is so frenetic, like there's so much like I mean, not it's not even that it's handheld because it's not handheld. It's just that there's so much like movement and bounce kind of in Beth's energy and then the way that she's moving all over the city. And so I just thought it would be really interesting as well for me as a director to kind of explore slowing things way, way down, like having 15-minute long two-person scenes, not messing around with too much camera movement, or if we are doing it all on the dolly, like really, really slow, subtle push-ins. Um, yeah, so it was like kind of just me trying to just explore something totally different that I had never done before. And I didn't expect to be able to make it so quickly. So I feel like the everything just kind of came together really fast. And so before Scrap even was released on VOD, I was able to there was just sort of a window where I was able to shoot Seance. And so I was like, well, I have to do it. In hindsight, that was crazy, but I don't regret it. Yeah, it was great. It was so fun, and I learned so much because we had a bigger budget on it, and I'd never done anything, period as well. And there's a lot of, like I was saying, like in my head, I sort of lied to myself that it was going to be easy. But anytime now that I know, anytime you do anything, period, it's going to be so much more challenging. Because you're also losing 90 minutes from the top of your day just to do hair and makeup, you know?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So it's like you lose a lot of shoot time just based on that. Um, but yeah, it was great. It was a really interesting challenge. Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot. But it was hard. It was for sure. It was a very good follow up for Scrap. It was great to do something so different and to kind of keep strengthening um, like my tools as a director.
Well, the film just debuted at the was it the Newport Beach Film Festival?
Yep. So we just had our world premiere at Newport Beach. So I think very soon, I think we're announcing a few more festivals for 2025.
Nice. And so, like, are people going to be able to see it? I mean, hopefully sometime this year or early next year.
Yeah. So right now I'm sort of just beginning to have conversations with distributors. So maybe by the end of 2025, but possibly, I guess it just depends how long the festival run goes. Although I do not expect it to go 2 years like Scrap did. Um, but yeah, probably late 2025 or early 2026, which is crazy to say now. But yeah, that'll be out on VOD, which is great, which is really fun.
Well, at some point, when closer to that time, I would love to have you back on to talk about the making of that movie because it sounds like a fascinating story and it's a fascinating film. And
You're
I just
really
kind of
like
want,
one of the very first critics to see it. I mean, really, it's like kind of in its, just sort of like making its little way out into the world. So you'll have seen it like a full year before everybody else. A year from now, you'll
wow.
be like, what was this film again?
No, I'm not gonna be struggling to remember it. That's for sure. But again, it's a privilege to have that kind of early look at it, and I'll be writing about it for very soon. But Vivian, thank you so much for hanging out, for talking about everything under the sun revolving Scrap. I think it's been very illuminating for me as a viewer. It's kind of enhanced my appreciation for a movie that I already love. And I want to say also congratulations on making that big step from doing other people's projects to really carving out your own path. I think whatever you decide to do coming up is going to be, people are going to be amazed by it. And I'm certainly, you've got a fan and certainly someone who will watch anything you do from this point on.
Oh, thank you. I know. No, now I'm so like, I think my actor friends are like annoyed with me because now I'm like pushing all of them to direct. I'm like, you have to do it. It's the best thing you'll ever do. But also I think I just underestimated how long I had been wanting to do it. Like I think I was sort of like, um, maybe like lying to myself about how much I wanted to do it. And now that I've sort of done it, I feel like I ripped the Band-Aid off. And now I'm like, I mean, not that I would stop acting. I love acting, but like I'm really hungry to, continue to direct more projects and hopefully bigger and bigger projects.
All right. Well, I'm pulling for you. So thanks. We'll have a link down below to whatever you want to promote. You mentioned you have an Instagram, and I know Scrap has a website. Is it Scrap the Movie or something like that?
Yeah, it's scrapthefilm.com. And then, yeah, Scrap is on Instagram. It's Scrap the Film. And Seance is also on Instagram. And I think it's just Seance Film. And then my production company, Rue d'Anjou, is at Rue d'Anjou.
All right, we'll have links to all that down below. Folks, if you liked this conversation, please feel to like and subscribe, and definitely follow Vivian. She's definitely one to watch. And again, thank you so much, Vivian, for taking the time. Thank you for bringing scrap into the world, and and for seance as well. And yeah, until next time, thank you and take care.
Hey everyone, Ian here. I know, long time no see. But if you like the video you just watched, feel free to subscribe to Kicking the Seat right here, and also check out the playlist and recommended video right here. Thanks for watching.